Welcome back to another week of Summer Tips from She. This week I'm with my sweet friend Audrey Martinez, and she's going to be showing us something that I'm really interested in learning today. So Audrey, what will you be showing us?
I'm just going to give you a tour of my garden, and I'm going to give you a few gardening tips.
Great, and as you can see, it's beautiful, it's lush, and I'm really excited to learn.
Great. So my first disclaimer is that I am not a professional gardener. I am just an amateur urban farmer. I love to garden, and I just want to take you through and show you a few tips about how easy it is to start gardening. And so there's several different ways that you can do it. You can garden just directly in the ground, which we've done with the corn. You can garden in garden boxes, like this one back here. And you can also garden in pots. And so I've done all three different methods, and I'll kind of walk you through all three of them. Corn typically has to be grown in the ground. Because it's so tall, it's easiest to grow it in the ground. You can't start it in with seedlings. And so that goes right directly in the ground. Other things you can start, like inside, before the growing season. And so those can go directly into pots, or they can go directly into garden boxes. So the easiest thing to garden, anybody can grow tomatoes. Tomatoes are the easiest thing to grow. And I have grown tomatoes in pots. We used to live in a really small house, and we had a really small backyard, and so I used to grow tomatoes in pots, and it was fantastic. This year I grew them in the garden box, and they just exploded. They loved it, but it was a different tomato variety, and so you can grow them in pots. It's really simple. You can use a tomato basket, and it's really simple to do that. Jalapenos are generally not a huge plant, so you can grow them in pots, and they're pretty compact, but they really produce a lot. So you can get a lot out of one plant. I have 3 different jalapeno plants, and so we should have an abundance here pretty quickly. The other thing that I planted in a pot this year was cucumbers. This is back here. So cucumbers I tried in a pot this year, and it worked pretty good. I think maybe next year I might try it again, but a bigger pot. And you have to use something like a tomato basket for them to climb. Cucumbers generally like to climb. We have a pretty big one down here that's about to be needing to cut off the vine, but this has done pretty good. It's produced pretty well this year. Another thing that I like to have in the garden is just a pot of flowers. These are hibiscus flowers, and they're huge flowers. It's getting ready to bloom again here, but I just like to have some color in my garden. Another flower that I have just kind of sprinkled throughout the garden are marigolds. And the reason I have marigolds is not because it's my favorite flower, but because they tend to help with insects. If you know, marigolds have like this particular smell, and a lot of insects don't like it. So it's a good thing to just kind of sprinkle marigolds into your garden. You can actually even put them into your pot with your vegetables, or into your box with your vegetables. Another thing you want to generally have in your garden is some kind of water feature. And we just have a bird bath stuck over here on this corner. And but generally maybe a low bird bath or something like that to attract frogs. Again, for the insects, to help control the insects. And we also feed the birds in our yard a lot, and so the birds help to control the insects. So that's just as much as I love to garden, I'm not an insect person. I hate insects. I'm not good with that. I like to have my hands in the dirt. I don't like insects. So I do what I can to get rid of them without trying to put poison on my plants. Thank you, Lord, for the rain. Another thing that I do to try to avoid the insects, this is kind of my squash plants box, and if you've ever planted squash, you get squash bugs. They're horrible. I hate dealing with them. They're ugly, they're nasty, but the only thing to do to try to control them is take them off, and take off the eggs from underneath the leaves, which my husband graciously helps me do. But another thing that I do is, if you'll notice this kind of like white powdery stuff that's in here, it's something called diatomaceous earth, and it's just a substance that is not poison, but the bugs actually ingest it, and it's got something in it that they can't digest, and so it kills them off. So it doesn't harm the plants. While we're talking about squash in general, one of the things, if you ever do any kind of gardening on a continuous basis, you will have volunteer plants. Volunteer plants are plants that the seeds have not decomposed or composted, and you'll get surprises every year in your garden. One of mine, 2 little plants were growing in my corn. I thought they were squash. So I transplanted them with the rest of my squash. Well, lo and behold, they are not squash, they are pumpkins. So, so this is trial by error gardening. I have a few pumpkins down in here. This is obviously too small of a place for a pumpkin patch, but you know, sometimes you just got to go with it. And so my squash is kind of dying out, and so it'll be perfect place for it to move in on that side. Another of my surprises this year was a volunteer watermelon. It started to grow in my tomato and bell pepper box, and it was right on the corner, and so I had the idea of maybe training it to go over the edge, and I had this just kind of old wire shelf that was sitting over by the garage, so I just came and I pushed it up against the box, and I've kind of been training the watermelon to stay in this area. So again, we'll see how it works, but the watermelon seems to like it. There's a great big one down here that is laying on a shelf, which is perfect for where I wanted it to be. As I said, tomatoes are super easy to grow, and as you can see, this one just loved it here. It overgrew, which is another, you know, trial by error kind of thing. I was trying to grow tomatoes and bell peppers in this one box, which is actually pretty big. It's a pretty big box, but the tomatoes loved it. And this is the first year I've grown heirloom tomatoes. They are by far not the prettiest shaped tomatoes. They're not perfectly round. If you ever see heirloom tomatoes like in Sunflower Market or, you know, one of your local homegrown markets, they're kind of funky looking. They're not perfectly round, but they are so, so good. I had heard years ago that if you want your tomatoes to produce, you should hit them with a stick. So I never did that. I always thought this was an old wives' tale until I started reading up on it. And actually, what it is that tomatoes self-pollinate. So if you, I don't know that you necessarily have to hit them with a stick, but if you shake them when they're flowered like this, if you shake them, they self-pollinate. And that's true with all peppers. So you can do it with your chili peppers, your jalapeno peppers, your bell peppers. When you see them flowering, if you just go through your garden and give the plant a little shake, then your tomatoes will produce. We'll see if it's true. The one thing with tomatoes are the tomato bugs, and they just look like really big worms. They remind me of the worms from A Bug's Life because they're big and fat. But they blend in perfectly with your tomato plants. So you will see the results of a tomato bug before you see the bug itself. This is a tomato bug. It just like strips your little stem. So when you see this, you know that you probably have some little worm in the area, and you might want to look for it. They're hard to find actually. They're easy to remove. You just knock them off. But fortunately, we have a lot of, like I said, we encourage the birds, and the tomato bugs like to hang out on the top, so the birds come and swoop them away. So you might want to feed the birds in your garden. That's a good trick. Another thing that I really love to plant in my garden is corn. And you might think that corn is for a big farm, but it's really not. Anyone can plant corn as long as you have a little space. And corn generally you want to plant pretty close to each other. It's supposed to touch each other because, again, it helps in pollination. These tassels up here, the little seeds, they fall into the crevices of the corn, and that's what helps pollinate the corn. So you want them to be kind of close to each other. But it's super easy to grow. Last year I had half of this, and it produced a fairly good amount of corn, and it was fantastic. The only thing with corn is that it does get little worms on the tips, and it's just on the very tips here. And so one thing you can do to help with that is once these silks, these are called silks, once they start to grow and turn brown, you can just put a little bit of vegetable oil on the silks, and that helps for the worms not to get in there. Actually, moths will land on the silks, and that's how the worms get in. So that helps with that. It's really intensive. If you don't want to do that, I did that a little bit, but not a ton, because you can harvest these and it's really easy to just break off the end of it, and then you've got a perfectly good ear of corn. Again, corn is super easy. It just needs a lot of water, and corn takes a lot of nitrates out of the soil. So what you want to do every year, if you're going to plant in the same place, it would be ideal if you could rotate them. But if not, you want to really take care of your soil and put a lot of compost, put a lot of fertilizer, rototill it, and just replenish the nutrients in the soil, and then your corn will come up again. Some things need to be rotated tomatoes do not need to be rotated, so you can plant tomatoes in the same place year after year. One of my husband's favorites every year, aside from the jalapenos, because he loves salsa, is green chili. So I tried to plant as much as I could in this planter box this year, and I planted it fairly close, wondering how that was going to work, but it seemed to work pretty good. And so I'm getting quite a bit of chili, and you can see even just this one plant in here has a few chilies on it ready to go. There's actually a ton in here. So chili, you know when it's ready, and the same for jalapenos, any pepper really. You know when it's ready because the vegetable is just really firm. And when it's really firm and it comes off easily from the plant, that's when you know it's ready. If you're bending it and it's not coming off easily, it's probably because it's not ready. Again, these ones, you just shake them when you see the flowers, and seems to be working this year because I've got an abundance of chili. One of the other things that my kids really like are strawberries. Unfortunately, strawberries have been my challenge. I tried planting them last year in a big pot, and they worked, but it wasn't as great as I would have hoped. The year before I tried planting a big strawberry patch, and we got very few again. This year I'm trying a hanging pot. They seem to be doing pretty well so far, even though the plant is so tiny. But strawberries are generally pretty easy to grow, and I think the important thing for that is that you just find the perfect spot for strawberries. And I know people have big strawberry patches, so I know that it works. This year I might get enough for a handful for each of my kids. We'll see. My garden, as you see, is kind of, it looks like it's in this area, but really I kind of garden all over my yard. And so I've kind of extended into this back part, and we have a big grape bush. Right now it's not too much of a vine. We just let it grow this year. Grapes are kind of a tricky thing. You can let them go. You're going to get grapes. If you really want to make it look pretty like they have in the grape orchards and grapevines that you see all along Rio Grande, you need to prune it. And so my husband's going to try pruning it at the end of the year and see what happens. But right now we do have grapes in here, and it looks great. It's just kind of taking over the fence and everything else. We have a few fruit trees all along this back edge. An apricot and a nectarine and a peach tree are back there. And I've even taken the opportunity, since I had so many seeds this year, I sprinkled some chili seeds underneath my fruit trees. And they're not doing as well as the ones in the box, but they're doing okay, and I think it's mostly because they don't get nearly as much sun as the other ones. So hopefully we'll have enough chili for the season. I've also got cantaloupe around the corner. That's just taking over one area, and that needs a lot of space to grow. Although again, I have a volunteer that's just on the other side of the fence behind the corn, and that seems to be doing great. So we'll see how that does as well. I also have a little herb barrel where I keep all my herbs, and I like to keep this closer to my kitchen so I can just run out and get stuff whenever I want. And right now my cilantro is gone, but I have an abundance of basil. And if you are like me and love garlic pesto, this is a fantastic harvest. As long as you just keep cutting it, it will keep growing all season long. So I've had this here for several months, and I've just been using it, and it makes great basil pesto. So as long as you keep it watered, it will keep producing for you. I have mint here in the back that you can just snip off and throw in a big jug of water or something when you're having parties. I also have sage here, which I like to throw in with roasted potatoes, and so it's just great. You can put whatever you want, whatever you use most of, whether it's chives or basil or mint or oregano or whatever you use. It's nice to have it all together in one barrel, and it grows well together. Just keep it watered and you can use it all summer long.